Hi, everybody. Welcome to Lean Whiskey. It is episode 30, a big round number. So it's good to be here. Thank you for listening. And it's great to be joined again by Jamie Flinchbaugh. How are you, Jamie?
I'm doing well. I'm excited that it's fall. It's my favorite season. I think we've covered that in an episode in the past, but really nice fall weather and spent a bunch of time at my alma mater, Lehigh University. Not any football. I had a bye week, although it was the first week we didn't lose, so I'll take that.
They are winless this year.
They are touchdownless.
Oh,
so
gosh.
it's worse. It's worse than just winless. It's touchdownless. Not going terribly well, but that's okay. You know, the soccer team won yesterday, and but we had some celebrations on campus, including inaugurating a new president, which is actually an alum, which is kind of really exciting. So I was on campus for quite a bit this weekend, and fall seemed to arrive mid-weekend, so which was kind of great. So so that's what's going on for me. What about you?
I was also back at the alma mater. I was back at Northwestern University. It was homecoming weekend. Fall was there. It's the coolest air I've felt in a while, but the rain mostly held off. The sun was out Saturday, actually. So it was in the mid 50s. I'd call that football weather. I was bundled up more than people who are more used to that weather, I think. But Northwestern did win. Northwestern beat Rutgers. We're 3-3, and it was good to be back. Win or lose. It was my 25th reunion, delayed a year because of COVID.
Nice.
So the good thing about it was they did a combined class party for the classes of 95 and 96, and I know just as many people from the class of 96. So that was a really good opportunity.
Yeah, we've I don't want to say pushed back, but we've had that discussion with the university numerous times because we all hung out with friends in various different classes. But it's like, well, how do you do that? Do you just do everybody's invited to every reunion or what exactly? So yeah, it's a nice opportunity. A lot of schools are trying to catch up on missed events, one way or another.
Somebody was saying they had a friend who went to Dartmouth, and they said by a matter of routine, Dartmouth has 3-year groupings of classes. So I don't know how you would do the groupings, because if I was class of 95, I know a lot of 94s and 96s. That would be great. Did the 96s want to have 97s and 95s? Dartmouth, they're smart. I'm sure they figured out something that
Dartmouth is, and I don't know much about how they run things besides academics, but our new president was the provost at Dartmouth. They've been an incredibly innovative school when it comes to education, which is great. But I don't know much about how they do things like reunions. So that's interesting. I know my wife actually sort of co-chairs our class because we graduated together. So we'll see. I think she's glad not to try to plan this when there's 3 other classes all trying, everybody's stacked up and they're trying to do a bunch of reunions at once. But yeah, it's nice to get back, and you got to see a win. We might get a touchdown one of these days, but I don't know if a win is in our future. We'll see.
One other comment about the trip. My wife, we flew back as we're recording this on Sunday. We flew back Sunday morning back to Los Angeles, and my suitcase is still in a state of barely gotten home. And she says, it looks like my suitcase exploded purple because it really was full of purple attire. I mean, this shirt has some purple in it. It's not the most purpley. I was wearing a purple jacket, so it's part of the purple explosion.
Yeah, well, it's one of those colors that most people don't just wear by accident. So it's one of those things where people are like, yeah, let's do some purple, and it stands out. I'm not sure if I have any purple in my wardrobe, but it's one of the why would I? So
there's got to be there's usually some school connection or We talk about, boy, I won't get sidetracked on this, but in our polarized world of red and blue and purple is, it's a come together color. So you sometimes see news anchors on election day, they wear a lot of purple.
That's true. That's true. Another thing that I don't need. So.
Yeah. But we were talking about celebrating homecomings and reunions, and it's episode 30. It was this year is the 30th anniversary of me coming onto campus at Northwestern. So 30 entered into things. I'll give Jamie credit on the stats here that we've done a lot of episodes together, but we've had 14 guests in different episodes. We'll certainly do that again. And Jamie says here, I'll let you read off the stat. You did the work to add this up.
Yeah, well, we're across 30 episodes, the 14 guests, and that doesn't count some of the people that chimed in on live episodes. That would be a much bigger number. But we've had 56 different whiskeys between ourselves and guests. So that's pretty interesting. We did make efforts at sampling and diversity of options, and they've covered 5 countries, and if I read the list correctly, 7 states. So that's pretty good across our 30 episodes. Trying to keep it interesting. I am unfortunately, we'll talk about whiskey here in a second, but
yeah,
I am not adding to the list. I'm using a whiskey that I used before, but based on the theme we selected, it was the one I was going to choose. So that's okay. It's also not the first whiskey we've had twice either. So, and I'll, tying the celebrations together. I only just heard this a couple of hours ago. It has nothing to do with most of our listeners, but it's a fun celebration. Is a soccer player I used to coach many years ago. She became the 5th woman to score in a football game, kicking an extra point this past weekend.
And you mean American football? It's confusing.
I do mean American football. Yeah. So she's a soccer player who became a football kicker in high school, and is the 5th woman to score in American football by scoring an extra point yesterday. So that's a fun celebration of someone who I remember when she was very little playing soccer.
Oh, no, wow. Well, when you said extra point, I didn't need to jump in to clarify, I guess, but me not knowing enough about soccer football, I'm trying to think, is there also an extra point?
There's
soccer
just
football?
Points. There's just points.
Just points.
Ball's either in the net or it's not in the net.
And the other statistic, and I guess this is worth celebrating, we did just reach a big round number, according to the podcast host. We are now over 10,000 all-time downloads, 10,200. So we'll toast to that. 30 episodes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a nice celebration number, a nice big milestone. Did not know that, so thanks for sharing that. I know we've never done that. This isn't a marketing podcast. This is you and I having fun and sharing our ideas with other friends who listen. But I don't have 10,000 friends, so I think that's pretty cool. I'm really excited to hear about 10,000 downloads, and thank you everyone who tunes in and listens. Really appreciate it. So cheers to everybody out there listening.
Yeah, thanks for listening. And then we're going to come back and talk more about books. Jamie is celebrating the completion and I guess we could say near publication, near release of
near release. It'll be basically next week. October 26th is release day. I only just got copies that are not advanced reading copies like what you have. So only just got those a couple of days ago. So yeah, very excited. First book in a very long time. So excited to get it out. And so that's just another reason for me to celebrate, hence our theme.
We will toast to that. It is called People Solve Problems, the power of every person, every day, every problem. For those of you who can see me holding it up on YouTube, it is not an intimidating book. It is easy to hold, easy to carry, easy to read. So congratulations. We'll talk more about book stuff here. In that celebratory theme, like Jamie and I had originally bounced back and forth the concept of, well, 30 episodes, we could drink 30-year whiskeys. This might be like the last big round number of an episode that we could get away with maybe even buying a bottle, because
we're
it's
not going to
getting
do
expensive.
50-year. Yeah, we're not going to go buy 50-year whiskeys for a podcast or probably any other reason. So
I wouldn't get away with that.
No, I think the return on that investment on a non-financial basis is just not there. So yeah, we looked at 30-year whiskeys. It became almost a chore. Became hard to find something that we could both pick up. Choices and shipping and not shipping, local, and what's available and what's affordable, just became. I don't want to say a headache, but it just wasn't going to work out.
But between the cost, and then I'm going to shake my fist at our antiquated liquor laws and distribution system and prohibitions on shipping into most places. Like I did find when I was back in Texas, local liquor store, because it's hard to find a 30-year bottle. Local liquor store that we really like. It's a nice local shop. They did have a 30-year Balvenie, but the price was about $1,000. And I like Balvenie, but I think, like you're saying, Jamie, there's diminishing returns when it comes to aging.
Yeah, because a 15-year is what, $70, $80, and if I remember correctly, and it's darn good. So is it? You age it twice as long, and it's more than 10 times better. I don't think so. So.
Sometimes it's just bragging rights or.
And I understand collectors who never plan on opening it, and they love, old whiskeys that are going to appreciate in value and sell to somebody else. But like, whiskeys and cars, they're not meant to be parked, driven. Whiskey's meant to be enjoyed. So we kind of pivoted to simply, what whiskey would you pull off your current shelf instead of buying something new? Which we probably both don't need to buy something new. Right. So what would you pull off your shelf if you were in the mood for a celebration? So that was the theme we went with. Now, interestingly, we'll have some very, very different choices, both very good, but very different. When I think about celebration and whiskey, my mind doesn't go to anything but a Scotch. And that's probably narrow thinking on my part, but it's just that's where my brain goes. I did, for those on video, I did grab some of my scotches. I have some unopened bottles, and I have some open bottles that most of which are getting pretty low. Thank goodness I have some unopened bottles to go enjoy. But that's, if somebody said, as we did, hey, what bottle are you going to pull off to celebrate? I'm not even sure I'd look at the non-Scotch side of my shelf. I just go straight to the Scotch, and I wouldn't always choose. I did happen to this time, mostly because it's already opened and I like it. But I did happen to choose the oldest one that I currently have on my shelf. I don't think that's an automatic rule for me, but as you see, so there's some whiskeys that I think age particularly well, like Dalmore. But so I chose a Glenfarclas. It's not quite the Scottish accent that you properly said that with.
I can't do it
including
either.
R's and C's in Scottish words, they come off very, very, very authentic when you've done right. But it's a 21-year-old Glenfarclas that I'll say is about two-thirds gone, but quite smooth. Not too strong in the peat category. Lots of sort of softer, without being sweet, lots of sort of candy tones, a little butter and toffee and things like that. I'm horrible at tasting notes, so don't quote me on any of that. But it's, not too much heat, not too much peat. Good long finish. You can really chew on, and so I do really enjoy this. And I don't think, again, as a 21-year-old, it wasn't $500 either, right? So it was pretty affordable for a 21-year-old that I have no idea what the price was. I can't remember, but it was not ridiculous for what you do get in the bottle.
Well, and Glenfarclas is one of those brands that's not as well known in the US. So there's less hype. Pricing a lot of times is based on availability or scarcity or name reputation. Like I learned about Glenfarclas in Scotland. Even Thursday night when I was in Chicago, I went into a really good whiskey bar. They had 850 different bottles they claimed. And now I was looking for something unique and special, and I ended up going different directions, but he pulled down the Glenfarclas 25 year. And for the age, the Glenfarclas is pretty good value. I think it's just less hyped, underappreciated, but very good.
Yeah, and it's I don't really care, but its bottles could perhaps use a redesign. Unless you're just like, I love classic designs. Some of
it's classic.
The others, it's like many, Sazerac, I assume owns them, at least imports them, but I assume owns them. But quite good. Enjoying it quite a bit on our celebratory episode 30.
Yeah. And the beverage director was saying, when you point to that classic look on the bottle, he was saying Glenfarclas was very popular in the 50s and then became unpopular. And so then the distillery had a lot of old barrels on hand. They weren't selling, and so they continue aging. And there's been a little bit of a renaissance. But
nice.
So what?
Nice.
What was that? Yeah. So I wish I could have a sip of that with you. But what I pulled down from the shelf, and if I have a second one, it's going to follow the theme. Have we done a theme of finish that bottle?
I don't think we've done it that yet. I know we've talked about it, but I don't think we've done it yet.
We might do that theme because, when the bottle's getting low, and if it's been open a while, that's where it starts running the risk maybe of oxidizing, and trying to limit my purchases. If I finish one, maybe I free up a space to buy one.
Right.
So today's bottle kind of falls into both of those categories. And this is one my wife and I agreed on buying last year during the pandemic. We found it here in California. It's one of the special, it's a high-end release from WhistlePig, which is based in Vermont. They use a lot of sourced whiskeys from Canada and some US whiskeys. But this is their release that they call the Boss Hog, and there's a series. So there are different releases. This is number 5, and Jamie or anyone on video might appreciate, you see the bottle topper, and the nickname for this one is called the Samurai Scientist. So I thought that was maybe we could connect dots to the lean part of lean whiskey. With the nod to Japan and being a scientist. This is a straight rye whiskey finished in umeshu barrels. And there's, and I should have looked at this in advance. I'll Google it. I think umeshu is a Japanese liqueur. It's a plum wine. I would have been correct, but I Googled it anyway, just to try to be correct. So, it's a high proof, 60%. ABV, and I think my wife and I we like WhistlePig, and we weren't celebrating anything so much as we were soothing ourselves during the pandemic of we can't go out in California. We're not spending as much money on going out and doing stuff, and let's buy a special bottle. And so as that's gotten down to the bottom, there were a little over 2 ounces left, and I shared it with my wife. She would have been upset if I had finished the bottle without her, because we've both enjoyed this one, and maybe it's gestures like that help, because we're celebrating our 20th anniversary in 2 weeks. And if I was finishing the bottles that she enjoyed, I might not have made it to 20, right?
Yes, that's another good celebration. I know your anniversary and my birthday are very close in date. And WhistlePig, which has been featured on here before, at least by me, but I think perhaps by you too, maybe not. But WhistlePig, it's one of those. It's very interesting. I don't think of a rye even as being something. Where I love rye, but it's like, okay, a celebratory rye. That seems like a stretch. But every time I see a price for a WhistlePig, I'm thinking there's no way it's worth it. And then I drink it. I'm like, yeah, it's totally worth it. They really do a good work up and down the line of their product line. really, really good stuff.
Yeah.
It's pretty rare I don't have a bottle of something in their line. And I've never found one where I'm like, that's the one I'm going to keep getting over and over again. I like to dabble anyway, but I think WhistlePig is a really good producer.
Well, and the less expensive WhistlePigs are nice. So as you get up on the higher end, and I misspoke. This is the sixth edition. Okay. I mean, so I do get skeptical, right? You get this was a $500 bottle. This is the most expensive whiskey I've ever bought. But you start getting to the point of like, you have a box.
Right.
Fancy opening mechanisms, and there's some origami in here, and I am going to keep this bottle topper because that's a heavy,
that's spectacular
pewter. That's a keepsake. But you start seeing these more expensive whiskeys, and you're like, I get skeptical with so much packaging effort of like, what are they covering up for? But I think a bottle like this would often be given as a gift. And so maybe then packaging does matter more.
Yeah, I think it does. And I think it's also, I mean, it's just like you buy an expensive car and people expect the pickups, experience to be a little better. It's not really what you're paying for. They just kind of expect a little bit more. And I do think there is a trend of like putting mediocre juice behind interesting stories. And well-designed bottles and well-designed labels and creating a good Instagram buzz around the brand. But the juice is just, typical sourced non-craft whiskey. Yeah. And so that's pretty common these days with a lot of brands, a lot of the micro brands that have been built up over the last 10 years. But WhistlePig they're not a design house. They're a whiskey house. They know what they're doing, especially in the rye categories.
But back to that question of value, like we've both really enjoyed this and we've shared it with some friends who really appreciate whiskey and they've enjoyed it. I'm not going to go buy another one for $500. The WhistlePig 10 or 12 or 15, or if I wanted to get splurgy, the WhistlePig 18 is fantastic at again, it's like half the price. Right. So this question of does more aging really merit double the price? Maybe not, but we did it. I don't regret it, but I wouldn't repeat it. Like it's good. I don't mean to badmouth it, but that's my preference on it.
And I think that's fair. It's okay. Just because you wouldn't repeat it doesn't mean it wasn't worth it. So sometimes it's just something you got to experience. And the experience was worth it, and you enjoy it, and you'll especially as you'll keep the bottle topper. Probably always remember the bottle. You may not really remember what it tastes like, but you'll remember you enjoyed it.
I mean, it's like some vacation spots. You can enjoy a vacation and say, yeah, but I don't think we would go back. That doesn't mean it was a bad vacation either.
Right. You're just going to do something else next time, and that's what I love about whiskey and wine as well is the exploration, right? I think the exploration is more interesting than just, finding something you like and sticking with it. I mean, the idea of, there's one bottle that it's the only bottle you ever have on your shelf again. Yeah. Like, that's not appealing to me at all. Like, I love the exploration. There's very few bottles. I know I have a Lagavulin 16, which is probably one of the bottles that almost always finds a spot on my shelf as a go-to. That's great. But even that, it'll last a while because I'll dabble in other stuff. So I think the journey, the journey and the exploration is most of the fun.
Well, and then just real quick, you talk about exploration. My wife, I don't have it handy. My wife and I did buy the Boss Hog 7th release, which is a Magellan theme. And it was aged in teakwood barrels, which I've never heard of. That's really unique. But then similar to like the Jefferson's Ocean bourbon, like they put the barrels on a ship and it circumnavigated the globe. Nice. So nod to Magellan.
Nod to Magellan, nod to Jefferson's. Because it does. I mean, I can't remember if we've had Jefferson's on the show. I know I've been through a couple of the ocean aged bottles, but it's pretty good. It's pretty good stuff.
I'll have to go look at the spreadsheet. Jamie has a spreadsheet. That's where he pulled some of the stats from.
We do have
for how many guests and how many whiskeys.
Yeah, we do have a spreadsheet. I was talking to somebody about my soccer refereeing, and they're like, "Well, do you keep data?" I was like, "Well, I've had 26 games and 157 goals and 18 different clubs. So like, yeah, I'm pretty sure I have the data." But yeah, I don't see Jefferson's Ocean on here. I have not had a bottle for a little while, so we'll see. I don't know what the theme is that brings that one out, but
yeah,
it's a fun one. So the Magellan, that's an interesting take on a special aging process. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so fun experiments, whether it's the samurai scientist or just whiskey, bourbon, rye. I should say rye because it's WhistlePig. Whiskey scientists, like our friend Dave Meyer. In fact, my in-laws just visited. They went back to see Dave and Glens Creek Distilling this past week. So they're coming home with more Cafe Olé, which comes in full 750 bottles now, by the way.
Yes, I have one. I'm kind of glad that he's bottling in the bigger, I'm sure more expensive, bigger bottles now, but it means you don't have to feel like you have to savor it so much because it's in a tiny little bottle. So that's pretty cool. So we kind of move on to some of what we were celebrating with the mention of my book being one of the things that I'm in a celebratory mood for. It'll be good to have. I mean, I really don't have much work to do now other than grant a few interviews, mm-hmm. but sort of a lot of work came out. So we normally cover in the news. So we thought we'd cover, on the bookshelf. And start talking about just books in general, right? Just mm-hmm. a chat about books. We've talked about this. You're both more recent experiences and more experiences that I've had, and so even numerous times throughout this process, I've reached out to you for a little advice here and there, and mm-hmm. A few questions. There's a lot of ways to get this wrong, So we've both written a couple of books. You've written more than I have, as I said, but books are, not just writing books, but consuming books. It's a sort of fascinating topic. Mm-hmm. There's a Abraham Lincoln quote that I enjoy. Books serve to show a man that those original thoughts of his aren't very new after all.
Why is that? Because you discover in your research that others have had those ideas and you've learned from them?
Well, and ultimately, I think that's, it's so many things you can kind of go, oh, Plato, right? And there is value in I'll say different articulation, new combinations, right? Just like there's no new foods. Well, there's new combinations. Yeah. New combinations, new articulations. There's some new insights for sure, but there's a lot of value in going back and reading some of the historical thought leaders, to borrow a more modern phrase, in the process. So
let me ask you to that point. How much of the book, and again, it's called People Solve Problems. I mean, how much of the book is based on your experiences, your clients' experiences, and how much is based on research and other thoughts that you're bringing together and connecting the dots on?
Yeah, so primarily, I'll say it's almost 100% based on my experience working with clients and working with individuals. The last book, which I wrote with Andy Carlino, The Hitchhiker's Guide to Lean, which was also called, subtitle was Lessons from the Road, and that was a nod to the fact that we had earned this knowledge through our travels. I'm not against research books by any stretch of the imagination, mm-hmm. but I definitely did research. So as I research things in general, as I read things, I try them out, I integrate them with other things. I'm always looking for connection and crossover points. That's just who I am. I love footnotes, right? I mean, not writing footnotes, but you kind of like, oh, here's a footnote. Let me go read that book.
Yeah, go dig in. Yeah.
Yeah, but there was a few chapters where I probably I knew where I wanted to go, but I did a little more research to help articulate it. Some of it was just reading stuff to help inspire my brain to make the right neurons click to find the words and the way I wanted to combine them. So, but it's not, yeah, it's very much not a research book. It's very much an experience-based book, and taking lessons from my observations, from my experiences, from my coaching, etc. So definitely more that kind of a book.
Mm-hmm. And when you think about having a book, you want to benefit the reader, and we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about the process and all the different stages of bringing a book to market. But you already have a book, and a lot of consultants talk about you got to have a calling card. That book puts a stake in the ground. It's some legitimacy and something to share in advance, or as a way of trying to help drum up business. You already have that, and I think it was a very good book on all these counts. Good for the reader, good for you. But so I guess there's two parts here. I'm asking you a question, but why write this one, and what are your thoughts on other consultants? How important is it to have a book?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. People ask me that, even outside the lean world, just, oh, I want to write a book. I'm saying, okay, why? Right. So what do you hope to accomplish? But, for me, actually, the first and foremost reason, and I truly do believe this, is it's a systematic process of clarifying my thinking. And so, that's what people pay me for. Right. And I'm fairly well known for the fact that I don't use PowerPoint when I present. I just speak with a digital whiteboard and off I go. And I kind of argue that, you really got to know your stuff if you're going to if you're going to stand up in front of a crowd or stand in front of a computer monitor with a few hundred people and just, I'll say, it's not that I'm winging it, but just speak with a blank sheet of paper. You got to know your stuff. And to me, writing a book is a great way to know your stuff. You clarify your thinking. How do you speak about it? How do things connect? What matters? And so for me, that's the number one reason. I think that there are two others. One is of course, marketing, right? New people read the book and then they call you and say, oh yeah, I read your book. I liked it. I found limits to that. That was never a big driver. It seemed. I mean, lots of people I'd eventually work with had read the book, but that's not why they called. But I think more importantly is your credibility when you do show up, right? Whether that affects the prices you can charge, or it affects the ability to scope it on your own terms, or how many times you have to repeat yourself before the client listens to you, right? Whatever form credibility shows up in, shows up as and through, I think the credibility of the book, helps, I'll say, lend it back to the consultant, the coach, the advisor, the speaker in whatever of those cases. So those have been some of my arguments. And so I'd say first, clarity of thought; second, credibility; and third, marketing. But you've written books, pretty broadly. You cover measures of success, which my desk is lower. It's up on the bookshelf, right up above the screen. Or Practicing Lean, which is also right next to it, which is a compilation.
And you contributed a chapter to that, so thank you.
Contributed a chapter, right? Not quite like pulling the book together, but and of course, Lean Hospitals, which is you can tell if it's the most popular of your books, but it's probably the most quoted.
It's now. I think it is the most popular.
Okay.
in terms of
That's
sales
what I
numbers. It's
assumed.
been out the longest also since 2008
Yeah.
with the first edition.
Okay.
But I mean, with those books, each and every case, like you said, there's the ability to clarify your own thinking. So I think, to say, I'm going to write a book, you have to feel like you know enough about a subject and can convey in a helpful, interesting, unique way, some combination of all of that. But then the process of writing, like you said, does help clarify how you articulate it. And, trying to be, I'm thinking of, again, this bottle, the samurai scientist. How can you be a scientist or an experimentalist with a book? Like, I've become a big proponent, we'll talk more about some of this process later on, of treating a book as a startup and trying to do experiments and get real feedback from real readers. Will they buy it? Do they think it's clear? What price are they willing to pay? Those are all things that you can experiment on. And one of our other points we're going to come to later is the question of self-publishing versus going through a traditional publisher. I think self-publishing gives you way more opportunities to experiment, because I haven't met a publisher yet who's into any of that. They are pretty set in their ways, and you may come into conflict. But I think having that clarity of thought. When I was able to co-author the Healthcare Kaizen book with Joe Schwartz, then there's this double impact of combining our experiences, learning from each other, using each other as a sounding board for what's clear and helpful and compelling. And then, with measures of success, there were a number of experiments that happened there. And one of the advantages is, if you want to book as a calling card, having a less expensive calling card is advantageous than self-publishing. The economics of that give you, I can give away a copy of Measures of Success as a full color book far less expensively than I could give away a copy of Lean Hospitals, which went through a publisher.
Right. Yeah, and I think there's the experimentation with clients, how the book is used. I think there's also just the experiment of the ideas of how they come together. It's a fairly costly experiment, just from an effort standpoint, right? And we always talk about how to make experiments cheaper. And so, this is a better question for you than it is for me, just because you have a much more mature and well-established platform for this. But, you have numerous podcasts, and you have, most popular blog in the lean world. Why write another book? Why not just put a bunch of content out in a blog setting where people can access it too? So what would be the argument for, again, you've put a long time into establishing those platforms, just like publisher establishes their platforms. Yeah. But what do you think of as the difference between, I have an idea, let me publish it as a book, versus just publishing more content on the blog?
That's a good question. During pandemic times, a lot of people rolled up their sleeves and wrote a book or wrote another book. I decided to put more energy into projects like My Favorite Mistake and the work that I'm doing with the firm Value Capture, including their podcast, Habitual Excellence. I think you can do both, because I've blogged a lot about process behavior charts and applications. And some of those things I had blogged about then got adapted to be examples in the book. I've done webinars. That's another format. Somebody could learn the entire methodology based off of webinars that are free, blog posts that are free, templates that are free, whether that's Kaizen or measures of success topics or lean topics. But I think at some point, people want the convenience of, well, hey, here's something that's packaged up in a neat format that's easier to carry around and share with somebody. I used a book coach, and one thing that she does is help bloggers recraft blog content into a book. And it's not just grab a bunch of posts and put them in sequence. Like,
Right.
Jim Womack did a book, Gembo Walks. It was basically just
Which was that?
a series of, he didn't call them blog posts, but his e-letters, and there was editing and sequencing and what to do. But Kathy Fyock, my book coach, helps people, like, I think of what Lean Hospitals was. That was not a collection of blog posts, but the blogging that I'd been doing about Lean in a way was practice. I didn't take any of that material and put it into a book. But, I think you can give a lot away for free. And then there are some people that are willing to buy it. Like, there's this other approach, other comment I was going to make. You look at companies. What should you put on your website for free? What should you put behind a registration form as a PDF? What should you try to put into a book that you might sell? And the argument, like, from the company HubSpot, or this methodology that's been used really well by KaiNexus, I'm helping value capture with this methodology now, is give it away for free, because that makes it searchable and findable. But then you say, well, if you'd like this in a neatly packaged PDF, you pay for it by giving your contact information. Like, that's a small price to pay. And then you think, as a company, somebody who's willing to give you their contact info is probably more interested than the person who just stumbled across the web page and read it. So anyway, that was kind of a rambling answer to your question. It could be a bunch of ands instead of ors.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I also think, whether it's for you, the writer, or for the listener, or for the reader, it's how do you want them to experience it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think a blog post, it's meant to be a nugget. There aren't supposed to be like a theme and supporting themes underneath it, backed up by other bullet points. Like, it's kind of like a nugget, right?
Yeah.
And I want to share a nugget, and I hope somebody takes away a nugget. And that's very different than, both as a writer, I want to think deeply about this topic. I want to tear it apart, put it back together, and do that a couple of times to really see how the web is woven. And I think for the reader, it's the same thing, right? I want to go into this topic a little deeper than grabbing a nugget. Like, I might get nuggets out of it, but I want to stay with it longer. I want to unravel it. I want to force my brain to do a little, free form thinking and reflection. And so I think, even on the consumer side, it's the same thing. Why not just grab a video on this, or why not just grab a couple blog posts? Why read the book? Well, you want to stay with the topic a little longer, and that drives, I think, a lot about when to use which medium.
So then, I still like keeping on this theme of thinking of a book as a startup. You have a concept. Should you move forward with that concept? And, I think of the questions, I think you're familiar with Steve Blank in the startup world of, can I build this product? Thinking of the book as a product. Can I build it? And should I build it? I think a lot of times the answer to the question of, can I write this book, may very well be yes. Should I write this book? That's harder to answer, in terms of, is there a market for it? Do you care? Right? Some people write a book saying, well, I was like that with Measures of Success. I didn't expect it was going to be any huge bestseller, but I enjoyed writing it. I'm proud of the book. I learned a lot in the process. But how did you think through this question of, like, you knew from writing a book before, you could do it. How do you decide the should question?
Although it was very different, because I was writing before ebooks, and the process was different. We'll come back to process, but I wanted it to be financially successful. I wasn't looking to get rich off it. I think the idea that people make a lot of money writing business books is just, there's some out there that do, for sure.
Those books are unicorns, to use a different startup expression. The book that you're going to find on sale at the airport bookstore, those are very few.
Yeah, they are. So, I'd like it to be a financial success. I've only recently been collecting all the expenses related to it, just to kind of find out somewhere down the road. but interestingly, I didn't have, a lot of market people read drafts of the book, meaning people who I intended the book for and kind of go, do you like this? Do you not? One is how valid is that, right? So you need validity in the experiment. And I'm sure there's a lot of people I could find and be like, yeah, I like it. Yeah, great book. They just, being polite or they know me already. And so how many books do you need to put in front of people before you really have some market validation? I don't know the number of that.
Yeah.
And so I looked at it like I don't want to say I didn't care. That would be a strong statement. I would be okay with it not being a commercial success, because my main reason for writing it was sharpening my thinking on this topic. And for me, it wasn't that it was cathartic. It was just my brain had been sort of, I don't want to say skipping along, but had been doing, helping at the surface level with a lot of repeat stuff for too long. And the idea of let's crack the thing open and go explore a different thread, think deeply, which I would usually do for 3 to 5 days at a time, just reading and writing for days at a time, thinking deeply about something. That it was more about that from what it would give me. So again, I want it to be a commercial success. Again, I don't want to say I didn't care, but it wasn't a prerequisite requirement for me to go forward, despite, unlike when you go through a publisher, I mean, you have the cost of your time, but when you're publishing, you have more cost of cash also.
That
so
upfront investment.
Should you invest in that product financially or not? And I was still okay with okay, it doesn't matter. I want to do this, and it will be what it is.
Yeah, but I think I've treated a couple book projects now as a startup or as a quote unquote lean startup, to use the Eric Ries phrase. As you know, Jamie, with the book Practicing Lean, there were a couple elements there that were very experimental, and even the early versions of Measures of Success. I did both of those books through a platform called leanpub.com, where you can publish initial chapters and people could vote with their credit card number to say, I'm buying that. It's like buying futures on a commodity or a wine or something. Because it comes back to this question of validation. You can follow, I've adapted a tool that's used a lot in lean startup circles called the Lean Canvas, to kind of sketch out what the book is, what differentiates it. Do you have competitors as books? Who's the reader going to be? Like this is something I want to formalize, maybe even as a book canvas or an author canvas. Single page. Sketching all of that out is your hypothesis.
Right.
How do you validate the hypothesis? And I think you alluded to this earlier, Jamie, like there's the startup trap of you ask your friends and family and they're like, oh, that sounds great. Like maybe they're just being polite, as opposed to somebody who feels strongly enough and really validates the idea, not as an opinion, but I'm willing to punch in my credit card or my PayPal. This is good.
Yeah. And I've experimented with LeanPub as well. Not as much as you have, but and I think I still have a product out there on it, which was really meant to be an experiment. Let me just.
That was your A3 book.
It was an A3 book, which is, I don't want to say I'm embarrassed to have out there, but I certainly don't put any promotion behind it. But I think it's still there. But it was, the question is, does it have what is market success, right? Do people that find Lean Pub represent the market? Do early buyers represent the larger market? How to test the hypothesis and be valid is important, right? And I use the Lean Canvas or the business model canvas, just another term for the same thing. I actually teach it. not to clients as much, but I do an executive education workshop on it for Lehigh, and I talk to students about it. But a lot of times it's, it's like, well, is your experiment valid? Or did you talk to your 10 friends and they'd say they would buy it, right?
Well, there's risk. You talk about, I mean, gosh, even 20 plus years ago at MIT, they were talking about, technology adoption curves. Right. What satisfies, what pleases your early adopters might not please a broader market. So you're right. You're really making me think, Jamie. There's risk of, if you focus so much on those early adopters and something that's perfect for them, that might not scale.
Right. I mean, if you decide to make the hottest hot sauce in the world, there will be some people that will fly across the world to go sample it.
Yeah.
And you'll be like, ooh, I have a hit. Right. But you find out that they weren't lead users. They were actually the entire market. Right.
Yeah. Right.
The 40 people that wanted that you've already sold to, and that's not a market validation.
So are you trying to win an award for the hottest or the tastiest, or are you trying to be the next sriracha? Those are two different goals.
Exactly. And I think knowing who you're writing for, knowing why you're writing it are important things. For me, like I'm writing for I'm writing for leaders, primarily. And I'm just going to grab a copy because I always want to get the words right on this. But my dedication essentially is, I said, this book is dedicated to every purpose-driven leader who aspires to craft an effective and resilient organization. In many ways, you go do a lean canvas or a business model canvas. Well, that's my customer, that person. Mm-hmm. Right. So it might be somebody that aspires to be that person. It could be somebody that supports that person, but that is my primary core customer. Right. So I think you do need to be clear about who your customer is, of course, what your channels are, how you're going to reach them, and your value proposition. Why this topic, right? Is part of it. And so, I think you have to kind of be clear about the value proposition. If you write it primarily as a marketing tool, I think there's a tendency where you kind of go, well, you're your own customer, and your value proposition is convincing people that, you're worth spending money on. And so does the book then have value? Like, you wouldn't write it that way, of course, right? But
but some people do. I've read some books where it's kind of off-putting, where it seems like the main theme of the book is how great the author is.
Yes. No question. The book comes off that way. I just don't know if they intended to, but if you go ask why they're really writing the book, that is why. And so I think this comes down to, in part, if you go look at, most books, and is it filled with like examples of, here's the service we sell or the product we have, or just me, right? Me all the time. Those can feel like you are the value proposition, and that's why I think having a clear customer around your book is an important premise, right? And that's where I think the business model canvas or a lean canvas for a book is an interesting idea. It's like, well, who am I writing this for? Everyone, right? So, I even made clear in this, I wasn't writing this for the lean community. I'm not against people in the lean community reading it, but the leaders I work with that I was kind of writing this for, some of them are doing lean, some of them are starting to do lean, but don't understand it. Some of them are doing other things. Some of them don't care what you call it. They're just trying to make their team better. And so all of those were all leaders I was still writing for, right? And Measures of Success is another example. It's not a lean book, right? It's lean.
That was like you said, lean people can read it, but that I was writing it for a broader audience. Like Karen Martin's books, I think, are a similar approach. It's deeply influenced by lean, and lean people would connect with it.
Yes,
but you've got to try to help build. I think you reach out to a broader audience for sure. And that's like thinking about, like, whether it's in software, understanding your users, or marketing. HubSpot and other marketing approaches talk about your personas. You've got to think of the reader when you're writing, and then even more so as you're editing. And I've been fortunate to have good editors. I know you worked with an editor. Maybe you can share some thoughts on this. But like, if you were to write a lean book, I think you don't want it to be read by a bunch of people who already understand lean to answer the question, to validate the hypothesis that the writing is clear. Like, I've had editors who are closer to newbies, but that's who my audience, like, especially let's say for lean hospitals or for all my books, like, these are meant to be introductory books. And so to validate the question of, is it clear or not, you got to be careful who's validating it.
Yeah, and I've always tried to be very good at writing without the assumption of base knowledge. I mean, some obviously experience. Yeah, it's not for just anyone, but it's, you don't need a translator, decoder ring. I try to be as jargon free as possible, and even more so in this book than The Hitchhiker's Guide to Lean, because at least that was about lean, right? So there's at least it might have been people's first book about lean, and we know it was for a whole lot of people, but it probably also wouldn't be their only book about lean. But again, try to be very clear on limiting the jargon with this new book. But yeah, a lot of it is around, how do you want them to consume it? Do you want them to struggle their way through it? And there's a lot of lean books I have on my shelf that are like, boy, that's a project, right? That is a hard read. It might have been worth it, but I'm also not sure I would recommend it. How to get from point A to point B, unless somebody just, really wants to sort of geek out and read, consume everything they can on a particular topic. So I think it affects, style as well. Like, I kind of, The Hitchhiker's Guide was, a lot of people were like, yeah, I cross country, two-way flight, and I finished the book, and and I kind of wrote this with similar idea of consumability. I didn't want people to get stuck. I wanted them to be able to get through it and find wisdom, wherever they would.
So you talk about formats, you think about cross country, or it could even be across the state. Different people like to consume content different ways. Are you considering, do you have a hypothesis around doing an audio book? Like, do you think your book lends itself to that?
Yeah, so The Hitchhiker's Guide, we published with SME, Society of Manufacturing Engineers, not because we went out on a search, but because they came to us and said, hey, would you like to do a book? I was like, well, I've said I did, and now you're asking, so why not? And then I had a contract, and then I had a deadline, and that, okay, get the thing done. So, but in a lot of ways, and I appreciate everybody there that was behind us and supported us. It's a great team. I really enjoyed working with them. The editing was fantastic. But they don't generally produce these kinds of books. They do, books like, I grabbed something off my shelf.
Like really deep technical
stuff.
Validating automotive,
$350 volume 22, right? So it didn't have much international distribution. It did not have any language translation. Did not, even little things like it came shrink wrapped for like the longest time. I actually don't know if it still does. Like, why? Like I'm just spending time taking the shrink wrap off.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have had books get damaged in transit, so maybe the shrink wrap.
It just seemed like extra, but it took a while to get it Kindle edition, and then I didn't agree with a few things there because Kindle didn't exist when we actually wrote the book.
Right.
And then there was never an audiobook version. So with this, basically hardcover, paperback, and ebook will all publish October 26th. And I'm pretty sure the audiobook is done.
Oh, okay.
It is uploaded. We're just waiting for it to be approved. So the goal is to have that actually released on the same day. So
good.
And we had, I mean, even as I was teasing the book on LinkedIn, people were like, "Hey, I hope you have an audiobook version."
Right.
and people have said that about the Hitchhiker's Guide for years. And it's like, I just kind of shrugged my shoulders, like, not much I can do think just, I'll read it to you. But
I mean,
I don't think there's a way to read it to them.
Yeah. I mean, I was happy so I'm happy to hear that. You know, we did an audiobook version for practicing lean, which I think that book lent itself to that because it was a collection of stories. Like very few of the contributors even included pictures or anything. Like it was a very text story driven book. I've had people asking, for the longest time, for an audiobook version of Lean Hospitals. Now that's a book that does tend to have a lot of diagrams and photos and illustrations. And how do you handle that? Like clearly there are ways to handle that. My publisher had said basically, if you want to do an audiobook, knock yourself out. But then I have to start thinking of that as a startup and trying to think of, well, what's the time and effort and expense and what's the expected return? I haven't looked at it close enough clearly in a way that would convince me to do it because I haven't. But I've had people ask me for measures of success, and that's one where I'm like, oh no, like that.
Yeah, that one I could imagine.
It would be really. It would have to be so abridged and watered down. Lean Hospitals could be done in a version, maybe.
It could be, but measures of success. If you could describe the pictures clearly in words, you probably would have done that. So
no.
But it's no, I didn't read it myself. I paid professional.
Okay. Well,
for a couple reasons. One is, professionals are good at that. That's what they do. And
it's time consuming.
It's time consuming. I actually thought about if that was the right answer, I would have been okay with it. But the other thing is I think I would have been so critical of myself. Would have been, there's a lot of things like with video, I'm like one take, it's just like, we'll give it the best we can do. And that's that. But with this, I feel like I might have, redone, not really known what I was listening for. Even little questions like they'd ask me, well, do you prefer this or that? I'm like, I don't know. You tell me. You know more about this than I do. So I'm like, all right, let's get professionals behind it and let them do their thing, because that's what I tried to do for everything else in the book.
Well, and that's really what self-publishing is about. What do you do yourself versus what do you hire others to do? Like self-publishing doesn't necessarily mean do it all yourself. We have all these decision points around, the illustrations or marketing or a website or different things. Like you could do it yourself maybe, or you need to pull in others. I'm thinking just of audiobooks. Katie Anderson read hers, and I think she also then very much self-published. Karen Martin read her books, but that was through a publisher. So I think, there are different pieces of the value stream that different writers, authors, self-publishers get involved in or stay involved in.
Yeah. And I think it might lead us to want to talk about the publishing models, because we've been sort of teasing that for a while. Publishers have their model, right? If you go to a publisher, they have their model. Now, a lot of them are weaker than they used to be. Right, the publishers don't have the clout they used to have because they made their money with the distribution and with their own marketing and promotion, and so it just didn't, that they earned their money, quite frankly, and they also owned the channel, so it just made sense.
Right. Right. Then not sound too much like Karl Marx and who owns the means of production, but it used to be the publishers were totally a gatekeeper. They owned the printing presses. Like now they outsource a lot of things, but authors needed publishers. And now I think it's almost completely in reverse. Publishers need authors, or what are they publishing? What are they making money from?
Yep. Yeah. And so, you know, you go look at the publishers and they, you know, what they would do is all of these things. If you kind of go, hey, what does it take to get a book to print? And publishers like, well, we know the answer to that. You don't have to watch. You don't have to. I mean, there's a lot of books out there on how to publish a book, right? So there's books and courses and coaches and others. It's like publishers just like, yeah, we'll do it all. We'll tell you what has to be done when. We'll tell you what you need to do, and we'll tell you what we're going to do.
Yeah. And as with anything, the way we've always done it could be good, or it could be just old habits.
Yeah. And I ran into both, right? I with SME, there's some things that how they did things, because it's not just publishers, it's which publisher and what their current evolution is in particular. But there are things where I'm like, yeah, I don't like that. At the same time, like, you know, Rosemary was our editor, extremely thorough. She's retired now, but extremely thorough, very meticulous, every little word, got it right. Now, didn't provide any structural, like didn't give us any feedback on the structure, or was this right, did this flow, but just editing, just getting it right. Very, very good. Mm-hmm. Was in their offices doing, you know, layout and things like that. And so, you know, publishers, I think, and a lot of that stuff costs money, right? Mm-hmm. You know, it's not, doesn't come for free unless you do it yourself, in which case you have to learn yourself and either educate yourself and be really smart at it, or publish enough books that you make enough mistakes that you get good at it over time.
It costs time and blood, sweat, and tears, or it costs money to hire somebody who already has some of that experience.
Right. Yep. And so I think traditional publishing, there was probably a couple I would have considered going with, because they did bring something to the table that perhaps I couldn't just go do myself, but not the route I went with book number 2. Right. Book number 1, I don't think I would have gone any other route back then, or even just being book 1. I'm not sure I would have gone any other route. But book 2, I felt like I had a little more education, a little more experience, and wanted a little more control. And so those things led to a different path.
Yeah, and I've shifted from using a publisher for lean hospitals, and then for Healthcare Kaizen, and then for the executive guide to Healthcare Kaizen, which is sitting behind me. And then practicing lean was my first experiment, was self-publishing. And that was, other than the help from the Lean Pub platform, there was a lot of self. And then measures of success was more of a model, I think, like what you follow, Jamie, where I was the general contractor, I was the project manager, but I've had a lot of companies and contractors that I selected and worked with in partnership. And there are many, many pros and cons. Like there's this question of control. You sign a contract with a publisher, you may not agree on what the title should be. You may not agree on what the cover should be. You probably won't agree on what the price should be. Like there are all of these different decisions. There are pros and cons. There are cycle time considerations. Like the traditional publishing model seems to be completely batch and queue and very time consuming. And depending on the book, like if you were writing a book that was really super timely, or you had business benefit from getting it to market sooner than later, self-publishing with the assistance of contractors, I'm convinced will bring a book to market much more quickly than the traditional publishing house would. So, you know, there are pros and cons.
I think the true full self-publishing model, you have a lot of control, and I definitely wanted some control. I mean, with my old book, I actually had an incident, and I won't go into any details, just somebody wanted to buy the copyrights of the book from the publisher.
Mm-hmm.
And, they said no. But I actually, I think they could have, right? They could have sold the book.
Was the copyright in the publisher's name?
Yeah, it almost always is, right?
I'd gotten good advice even with lean hospitals. Yes, the initial contract from the publisher will list them as the copyright holder, but that's one thing you can push back on and say, no, I want the copyright in my name. Because if the publisher goes out of business or stops printing it, you want to make sure you have ownership of the IP. Yep.
And I think that's one of the things that's changed as self-publishing has come along. But yeah, in a lot of cases, they either start out owning it or they just do. And that's not the only reason. Again, I would have loved to have an audiobook version, but they weren't willing to do it, and so it was just never happened. But self-publishing is, fraught with mistakes. It's easy to look like an amateur because you are one, right? I mean, you kind of go, there's certain things that professionals learn how to do through training and experience. And if you don't have it, then you're going to look like an amateur. And if you're okay with that, that's fine, right? If you want to rapidly learn and you feel you're pretty good at rapidly learning, then that's okay too.
Yeah.
And so, I think the idea of the self-publishing is fine for a lot of people, works quite well, because in the end, they just want to get their stuff out there. Right. And that's great. They can do it cheaply. They just got to do the extra work to get there.
And that extra work could include website, public relations efforts, publicity. But I mean, you can hire people to do that. And a lot of times if you go through a publisher, you still end up having to kind of go above and beyond to hire people to do things the publisher may not be willing to do. And I think just the other thing to think about, the other point I'll make is when you publish yourself, like, you get set up through Amazon and or a printer, like I use Ingram Spark to print copies, but then I also have Amazon print copies that Amazon is selling because that supply chain seems to be streamlined in different ways. But like you see, you can, to a fault, you can look at daily sales data and you can start seeing, if you want to start evaluating cause and effect of different promotional efforts, PR, publicity efforts, you can start seeing those connections. And then Amazon will pay you monthly. Traditional publisher sends you a report twice a year.
Yeah.
I got payment twice quarterly, a year.
But nothing better than quarterly, and you don't get much data, right? Because they're not looking at it by day, and they're further back in the chain, so they're not looking at point of sale either. They're looking at their wholesale orders.
Right.
So their data is not even good enough to begin with. But the sort of hybrid model is point around, hiring people. I think there's just different degrees of that. You talked about being your own general contractor. I actually, I don't know, it's way I'm saying this makes me sound like an innovator. It's not. It's just a different model. But I actually hired a general contractor.
Yeah, you can do that. Yeah,
you can do that. Bethany Brown is her name. Did a great job, and she put the other resources together, right? So we still had somebody doing layout. Now I had found two resources myself before I even got around to working with Bethany. One is Rob Worth, who you actually introduced me to.
Yeah, I know Rob. He's in the UK. Yeah,
in the UK, has a lean background, understands the topic, and he did a structural edit, which really changed the flow of the book, which was great. It really added a lot of value. And then I'll only say her first name, Laia, because I'm going to probably butcher her second name. She's actually in Portugal. Another lean person, a lean-oriented person who did the illustrations. Because it was one of these where, like, I had a few illustrations in mind. I felt like lightening the book just with some extra illustrations. So I didn't even provide a lot of direction. I was like, I like your style. read the book, make some illustrations.
Yeah.
And like bring it to life, because I liked how she did things, and so, you know, those were resources that I found. And so there's in the end, a lot of the skilled and experience-based pieces of putting a book together, I didn't try to learn myself. I simply tried to be a good judge of talent, if you will, and then brought people in, and that cost me money, right? Obviously, I paid talent, and so I definitely invested more in the upfront of this book than I did my last one. And that's one of the, you know, you have publishers will pay for some of it themselves. You can do all the work yourself, or you can pay for somebody to do the general contracting, you know, hierarchy is a pretty good analogy for how to think about, you know, cost benefit and analysis, how much you're willing to do yourself and how much you aren't.
And I think one other example that comes to mind, like when you are your own general contractor, or you have someone serving as your general contractor, the subcontractors correctly view you as a customer.
Yes.
And the accountability on timing and performance and everything flows through that way. I had hired company A to initially do the paperback interior layout design for the book Measures of Success. First couple of steps into that, I was, long story short, not happy with the quality of their work. I was not happy with the timing. They weren't on time, and I wasn't happy with the quality. And basically, they're like, "Well, okay, you know, they had some extenuating circumstances / excuses. They weren't fighting me. They apologized, and I was able to walk away from that. So it caused maybe a month's delay." But I was able to then go to company B that I ended up being very happy with. And, you know, there's risk of, like, you know, if you're working with a publisher, you're kind of locked in to what it may be harder to resolve that conflict.
Because the people doing the work aren't, you know, you're not their customer, right? The person inside the company is their boss or their customer. And even my example of using Bethany to lead a lot of the project was, she had a lot of relationships. Nobody wants to mess with those relationships. Nobody cares if they mess with a relationship with me, right? Yeah. Like, I'm not bringing them enough business where if they have a disappointing engagement, fine, there's another customer out there. But with this person sort of leading this, they all want to help make it good for each other. Right. And this ecosystem. And I think that's pretty cool, because they have more freedom. They're all freelancers. They all work together. They all want to, you know, do a good job for each other. And so it's been a pretty darn good experience. I would say, other than the fact that I did spend a lot of money, and that was a conscious choice. I'm not complaining about it. Other than that, I wouldn't hesitate to follow the same model again.
Yeah. I wouldn't hesitate either. And to other potential authors out there, we're happy to talk with you. I've had a lot of conversations with potential authors, and we've covered some of the same ground we covered today, and some other points. But one other thing we wanted to cover before we start wrapping up was just around titles, like coming up with a title. It's hard to iterate on the title once the book is published. Like Steve Spear and his publisher is the only example I can think of. His excellent book was published initially as Chasing the Rabbit, and then it got republished as The High Velocity Edge, which I don't know if that was a better title.
I've got both on my shelf, both versions.
There was probably a third title that may have served him better, because it's an amazing book. And like the first one is esoteric. The second one, I don't know if that really captures it either.
It's a better cover design. That's
There's a better cover design,
but
more modern, but
more to it than that. So it's like picking a new title for your, you know, name for your company, right? You know, like Jay Flinch, like that's mine. And you think, well, that's not very original or creative. But boy, that took a long time to get to. 17 different, options. So, do you have a title first and then flesh out a book? Do you come up with a title halfway through, at the end? Like, how does coming up with a title fit in the process for you?
I mean, I've done both. Like with Lean Hospitals, that was pretty straightforward. We're going to write an introductory book about lean for hospitals. Like, it was to a fault, straightforward, 2 words. But you want to think about, like, what are people searching for? Can you get the domain name or a reasonable version of the domain name? Practicing Lean was a title before any of it was a book. That was the theme. Measures of Success, I was writing the book for a while without really knowing a title. So I've kind of gone about it different ways, and being open to feedback from people about title and subtitle. So how'd you go about, did you test alternatives for People Solve Problems? Did you test title and subtitle?
Yeah, so I definitely tested the first one. So I've always said I want a title. I had 3 criteria that I used for the Hitchhiker's Guide. It's like, I want it to be clear. I want it to be able to help explain what the book's about. I want it to be fairly concise, which I'm not sure I met with the first one, but and I want it to be a little catchy, right? I want it to, like, kind of pique your curiosity, if you will. So Hitchhiker's Guide came about. We were brainstorming. I have no idea what the other options were at this point. I'm sure somewhere there's a file that I probably don't have anymore, with some Excel spreadsheet. That we didn't test, right? Social media wasn't as big a platform back then, and we didn't really test. But, the Hitchhiker's Guide to Lean came up. Actually, Andy came up with it, I'm pretty sure, but I'm almost certain it was him. We added it to the list. I was quickly like, nah. But we added it to the list anyway. And I wasn't a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy fan. And first I had to do some research. Like, can we use it? Like, it turns out Hitchhiker's Guide is not a trademark. There was another, at the time, I think there was only one other Hitchhiker's Guide book out there, like the Hitchhiker's Guide to Roses or something really weird. Now there's several of them, like out there. But yeah, it wasn't trademarked. It wasn't like, Lean for Dummies or the series. So we could use it. And it was, and I honestly don't know if it was like nothing else that we came up with caught our attention, and so it was the last one standing, or it just grew on us.
Yeah.
And I think if it wasn't for the subtitle, Lessons from the Road, I'm not sure we would have gotten it out, right? Because it's like Lessons from the Road kind of tells you what the Hitchhiker's Guide's about, and of course there's the highway and the very soft image of the map on the clouds that most people don't even notice.
Yeah.
With this one, I put it out there because I had ideas, but I wasn't sure which ones, and unfortunately, I'm not sure it was very helpful because I had, like, here's 10 options. Well, here's 20 votes for each one. Like,
yeah,
it really was all over the map. I like this. I hate that. So ultimately it came down to, I kind of have a personal preference towards a slightly catchier title with a slightly more clear subtitle.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I went with. I really wanted to be about people. That was really what the book's about, is about people. So that would have worked with either the title or a subtitle. But, I tried to sort of crowdsource titles, and I'm not sure it helped a whole lot. If anything, it just convinced me that I should just make a decision and go with it.
I think a lot of online surveying is kind of stealth promotion, and I've been guilty of that myself. So I'm not.
Yeah, I no question. I was also out there kind of, hey, I don't have content to share with you, so I'll at least talk about this because I'm excited to talk about it. So no question, I was also kind of helping to try to hopefully get people excited about it. But I did was like, I don't know which titles. I have a bunch of titles. They've been floating around with my brain for months. Where do I go with this? So,
Yeah.
so I did try to get some crowdsourcing help. And even, I mean, it'll be like even cover designs. I'd take like two different versions up to my family, and two would like one, two would like the other. I'm like, oh, thanks for that.
It's very subjective, but
subjective.
I did a lot of cover design testing. And even though, there's that expression, it says you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, people do.
People do. People do. Now I really like Measures of Success. I think is a really interesting title because it's catchy. It's about measurement, right? You get into the subtitle, you start to get more interested in what it's about. Lean hospitals, as you said, it was kind of, on the nose, right?
Well, I mean, it could have been called lean healthcare.
It could have been. It could have been. But there wasn't you didn't have to overthink that, right? You could have, but you didn't have to. But Measures of Success, you could have called it process behavior charts, right?
Or the subtitle could have been, so the title and subtitle is Measures of Success, React Less, Lead Better, Improve More. It could have been Measures of Success, the power of process behavior charts to help you run your business better. Not exactly that, but.
Right.
But I don't think people are out there searching for the phrase process behavior charts. Now, maybe I should have put a phrase like business metrics in the title, in the subtitle.
And I honestly didn't think a lot about search engine optimization, in part because, as a book, I'm not sure. Maybe I just couldn't figure it out. I'm not sure what the exact words would be that would lead somebody to want this particular book.
Yeah.
In part because I was trying to write about stuff that I didn't think was already well covered. But I'm really interested in the Measure of Success title. And then what's interesting about your book, Practicing Lean, is, that's a book I actually referenced the title of, not to talk about the book, but talk about the nature of the title and the fact that we learn through practicing. And so I just, the fact that the book is called that, I referenced that. I use that to recall the whole idea of practicing lean as a concept. So I think that's probably perhaps my favorite title of yours.
Yeah. And even if people didn't read the book, that phrase, like that idea, you want an idea to spread. And I've got an episode of my lean podcast coming out soon with Nick Katko and Mike DeLuca. They wrote a book called Practicing Lean Accounting. And in the episode, and they give a nod, they're like, yeah, we heard you speak at the Lean Frontiers Lean Coaching Summit, where I'd given a talk on that theme. I was thrilled. I didn't feel like they were ripping me off or anything. It's not like I planned to do a whole series of books on practicing lean blank.
Right.
That resonated with them, and I'm grateful that they would sort of carry forward that phraseology.
Yeah, no, that's pretty cool that they did give you that nod. But it is a tough one, right? Coming up with a title that's meaningful, that works, that you're happy with, I think Practicing Lean could have probably also been called The Hitchhiker's Guide to Lean, Lessons from the Road. If you think about the substance of the book, right, of different people sharing their stories of their travels and their experiences, that title would have worked for that book too.
Maybe. The one I agonize over is Joe Schwartz and I did a book called Healthcare Kaizen. Would the book have sold more if we had used a phrase like continuous improvement rather than the Japanese word Kaizen? Because we used the subtitle to explain. We used the phrase continuous improvement in the subtitle. So it's hard to tell. Like, was the book too expensive, or there's all these different factors? Maybe the title was just one of them.
Yeah, and it's probably right. No one particular reason, but and this goes back to your target market, doing your lean canvas or business model canvas. If you say, well, people in healthcare are the target audience and what resonates with them. And, what's interesting, when it comes to actual healthcare, they're as jargon heavy as anyone.
There's a lot of Latin for sure.
There's a lot of Latin, right? You could have used Latin, maybe, but
that would have been, yeah, that might have worked.
Yeah. But when it comes to lean stuff and other business stuff in general, they kind of, dismiss some of the jargon because they don't want to be overrun by other domains, and for a lot of good reasons, right? I mean, there's good reasons behind that bias, but that bias comes with a closed-mindedness that comes along with it. And so, yeah, I think that's an interesting question, is if that's your target market. I would say this, did it close some doors to people buying it? Probably. Did it convince the people that wanted that topic to buy that specific book? Probably, absolutely.
Right? That's the two sides of that coin. So I just did a quick Google Translate search. Continuous improvement in healthcare, Latin would be continua melius incurus. That's no more catchy than Kaizen.
Sounds fun.
Healthcare Kaizen.
Sounds fun. There's a challenge for one of us to work a Latin word into the title or subtitle of one of our next books. So I actually hope I lose that challenge, but
I'm not gonna.
I don't think we're headed there.
I'm gonna blame the whiskey for that idea. So we should probably wrap up here. We've talked a lot about books and the process. Do you have a book on hand about whiskey? We're reading books about more than lean, right?
Yeah, I actually went to look because I wasn't sure. I don't. I have a couple books about wine. I have a couple books about. So the closest I actually have is a book about the Highlands, and it's about the clans of the Highlands. But I don't actually, and I have a book about coffee. I have the World Atlas of Coffee. I have Simple Wine or Simply Wine, which is a great book. I don't actually have a book about whiskey, which seems wrong. So
I should get you one.
It's coming up on Christmas. Maybe I'll mention that to my wife. She probably wouldn't hear me say it, so I'm not sure it'll matter. But I do not have one. But it looks like you probably do.
I've got a couple. There's different books, right? So there's a reference book like Jim Murray's Whiskey Bible 2021. And Jim Murray has been a fan of my friends at Garrison Brothers. He has given really good reviews to our friend David Meyer from Kentucky and Glens Creek Distilling. There's a book I bought, and I still need to read, The Complete Whiskey Course. Now, this is a more intimidating encyclopedia of history and knowledge about whiskey. I should probably, that's one that.
That's one you should read while drinking whiskey.
When I was reading the first couple chapters of People Solve Problems, the new book by Jamie Flinchbaugh, I sat down in a heavy leather chair with some whiskey, and that was a good combination.
Excellent.
Plenty of books about whiskey.
Plenty of books about whiskey, none of which have the answer. Drink what you like is the answer to almost any question.
Drink what you like, drink how you like it.
Drink what you like, drink how you like it. Lots of advice, none of it right. Probably lots of it right, but it is a very personal thing. So all right. So why don't we wrap up with a very final question, since we're talking about books. So I have my old former partner at my old firm that Andy and I ran, Ron Holcomb, great guy. He used to say almost every time he introduced himself, he would share a quote that he said was from Lou Holtz. I actually tried to look this up, could not find it. But it sounds good. And he said something like that your life will change primarily because of the people you meet and the books you read. Right? He was kind of saying this to say, I'm glad to meet you all. So what's a book that you've read that sort of changed your life?
I mean, I'll throw out two that to me are very related. One is Dr. Deming's book, Out of the Crisis. And then the other book is Understanding Variation by the statistician Donald Wheeler. Those books have been, I was fortunate to read those both early in my career, and those are ones I'll point to as favorites. As much as I like some of the books in the lean literature, those two really stand out for me.
Well, and I think for most of us, when you say what book changed your life, it generally was things that set you on a pathway, and probably pretty early. And that's definitely true for me as well. So mine's Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
That's a much more serious book. Right?
It's a pretty serious book. I'm not sure what the right reading environment is around that. But if you read Simon Sinek's Start With Why, in some ways it's very similar in message, but going back to the beginning theme that all ideas have already been had, this might be an evidence of that. And of course he goes back and refers to people earlier, but really living a life of purpose, having a purpose, let that drive you, is really central. And that's been key to me as I've made big decisions. So that's on my shelf today, and probably, I'm sure always will be, always a reminder of what matters. So that's a good book for me. That definitely had an impact.
Well, great. Well, thank you for sharing that. And as we wrap up here, my secondary theme was, finish that bottle. So I mentioned Garrison Brothers already in the context of the Jim Murray Whiskey Bible. I had just a splash left in this bottle of Garrison Brothers Honeydew honey-infused whiskey. So I went ahead and finished that.
Wow. So you're finishing all kinds of things. So
hashtag goals. That sounds worse than it could to say. I finished 2 bottles of whiskey today. There was a small amount left in each.
Yeah, it's all how you say it. But now there's room for more. Now there's room for more on the shelf.
Yeah. So we'll figure out what our theme is going to be for the eventual episode 31. We don't have to worry about I don't think there are any 31-year-old whiskeys on the market, but thank you for listening. And you can find all of our episodes, whether it's me and Jamie or a guest or a co-host. You can find all of those at leanwhiskey.com. You can spell it whiskey, K-E-Y, or whiskey with a K-Y, depending on your own preference. Or you can also go to leanblog.org/leanwhiskey.
Yep, and you can go to jflinch.com/leanwhiskey. So I appreciate you doing that. Look for us on wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Google. I really appreciate it if you find us there.
And if you do, if you're willing to take a couple of seconds, please rate or review the podcast as well. So with that, I have a sip left of this Garrison Brothers Honeydew. That is a bottle that I would repurchase and have repurchased before. So with that, Jamie, thank you for talking about the new book. We'll cheers. Congratulations to the near release of People Solve Problems.
Thank you to episode 30. Cheers.
Cheers.